my mother said, would you like to see the film your mother was in, King Kong? I think you're old enough to see it. And I was very proud that she thought I was old enough to do anything. So I watched the film, and she was a little nervous about it because it's kind of scary, right? So I'm watching it, and she paces back and forth, and she would go through the room, and she'd say, I just have to get something in the kitchen. And then she'd come back, I just have to get something, because she was keeping an eye on me to see if I was upset. Well, by the end of the film, I was sobbing. And she said, oh, honey, were you upset that your mother was in danger that way? And I said, no, they killed King Kong, and that was so mean. He just liked you, and that was so unfair. And I was really kind of annoyed with her for at least 2 or 3 days.
Also, when she was making this movie, or at least doing tests for this movie, she was also doing the most dangerous game. So what was that like for her, going back and forth, taking a wig off, putting a wig on?
Well, the same directors were doing The Most Dangerous Game, and some of that was being shot on the same set, at RKO. So when they were doing the tests, she would be in Most Dangerous Game, and then she'd run over and do something, and they'd take some shots for King Kong, and she'd run back and forth. It was both of those films are very physically demanding. So I think she loved it. It was energetic. I mean, she'd done a lot of films where she sort of stood and looked beautiful, and this was energetic, and she was a kind of natural, not an athlete, but she had a lot of energies. I think too, Marion C. Cooper and Ernest B. Schoedsack, who were the directors and the creators of this film, she adored them, and it was exciting to do anything with them. So it was a wonderful working experience.
Was it Four Feathers that they first worked on in '29, and that took like 2 years to, and Richard Arlen and George, who else was George Rapp? No, but Richard Arlen was, they had to do the love scene like 30 times or something. Right. But also with King Kong, I think Cooper had her like, they kept her working for 22 hours, and hours and hours and hours she had to scream, and then finally his wife, Dorothy Jordan, or wife-to-be, finally said, you can't do that to her.
I was going to tell that story, but she just told it. That's true. That is true. He came home and said to his wife, I worked Faye for 24 hours. And Dorothy looked at him and said, you must never do that again. And he never did. He was quite proud. He thought, and she didn't mind. She thought that was, all for a good cause. But this was, of course, way before there was a Screen Actors Guild and rules about how long you could work people and turnaround and all these things. And not surprisingly, within a couple of years, the Screen Actors Guild was found. And a lot of it was about working conditions. Actors and actresses worked extremely hard and in a merciless kind of way sometimes.
6 days a week, too.
6 days a week. Well, you still work 6 days a week, but at least when I was producing, I worked people 6 days a week, but you follow the rules, you can be fined, and, well, you should be, yeah.
Could you talk a little bit, because when I interviewed her with you that one time, about a year before she died, she talked about what it was like, the whole thing about being picked up by the hand. And instead of speak to the hand, it was being held by the hand. So could you talk a little bit about that experience for her?
You mean about being cinched into the... So many of you may already know that the actual King Kong was 18 inches high and was done through this stop motion photography, and that they had a big arm and hand that was about 8 feet long and on a crane, and then a cinch in the hand, and they would cinch her into it and then crane her up 20 feet, 30 feet, I don't know how many feet in the air. and then say to her, you know, action, scream, and at a couple of instances, the cinch came loose. And she was hanging on for dear life, and she was screaming, "Let me down!" And they said, "Good job," you know. So it was precarious, and anyway, yeah.
Also, Cooper, you know, Cooper trusted her so much, he let her decide her look for the film too.
That's right. Yeah. So she did her own wardrobe. She changed her hair from brunette to blonde.
Why do you think she went from blonde?
I think it was the aesthetics of it. You know, this very dark animal, and her dress was, as you know, light colored, sort of diaphanous dress, and the blonde hair. I think she understood the symbolism of the piece. You know, sort of the consummate female image, and this very masculine being. And then, of course, you know, the upshot of it is that he becomes domesticated almost by her because he falls in love with her. And I think that's kind of the genius of the film, that you see that it's really his tender heart that comes out, and he wants to take, oh, I'm giving it away. And you've all seen it, so it's okay. I don't know, you probably, some people in the audience may have some other views, but.
Also, you can talk to anybody at like any age these days, and if you say my mother's Fay, you know, they ask who your mother, Fay Wray, they immediately know because this is the one that's lived on. But this isn't your favorite film of hers, and it wasn't her favorite film. Can you talk, because she made it, what you were saying, like over 120? Can you talk about what, like Wedding March and a few other films that you really admire of hers too?
Yeah, so I think she grew to love this film, but I think from an acting point of view, you probably all, there's some lovely scenes in King Kong, but actually from an acting point of view, her first big starring role was in The Wedding March, a silent film that was directed and co-starred Erich von Stroheim. And he was a magician. He was a master filmmaker. The first version was, I don't know how many, 8 hours long. And the studio, the producer was going bankrupt and took it away from him, and they cut it down to 2 hours. But she's very beautiful in it. It's a tender story of a peasant girl and a prince. And when I see it, I cry. I get very choked up, and I don't think it's just because it's her. I think it's a very tender film. It has, anyway, I sobbed by the end of it. And she always loved that film. That was, you know, was like her first big part, but also, you remember that first date you had with somebody you had a crush on? I mean, it was just deeply embedded in her spirit. There were some other films she did that I rather liked. That she loved working with Victor Jory. She thought he was an incredibly, you know, exciting actor. She did a couple of films with him, Mills of the Gods and White Lies. But there's one that I sort of take a cotton to, and it's called The Affairs of Cellini. And it's a farce, and she plays a complete bimbo, which is so not her, with Frank Morgan, the guy who played in The Wizard of Oz, and he got an Oscar nomination. And it's very, and Constance Bennett and Bennett Cummings, Anyway, and then, forget I said that, and Frederick March. But it's, she was trying to push her way out of the typecasting of scary movies, you know, so she did that one. Gregory LaCava was the director.
And I know when I had interviewed her for that, when they showed it at LACMA, they were doing the LaCava, and that's how, and she's only had great things to say, even though he did so many comedies, I think he was kind of serious, you know, which kind of belied the type of movies he was making. This movie came out in 1933, and in fact, I think it was this past weekend that marked the anniversary of when it opened at Radio City Music Hall in 1933. But also at the same time, your dad, Robert Riskin, it was the year that Lady for a Day came out, which was like the biggest hit. It got all the Oscar nominations, and so he was riding high at Columbia with Capra. Could you talk about where his career was at this time and their relationship? And it's also it's the 85th anniversary of It Happened One Night, too. So could you talk a little bit about that, too?
So Lady for a Day, does anyone know that film? It's a wonderful film. Thank you, I love that film. My father had written that, and it was so successful that, Columbia was a Poverty Row studio. Harry Cohn was a cheapskate. And they said it was so successful that you could get pencils and paper clips without having to requisition them. You could just go get them. It was a turning point, but it was also a turning point, I think, in the Riskin-Capra relationship. And not long after, they did It Happened One Night, and no one thought that was going to be a successful film, but they had enough standing now that whatever they wanted to do, Harry Cohn just said, "You go off and do it. Leave me alone. Go make the movie." And he pretty much gave them carte blanche on most things. If he could afford it, it was all about money. Yeah.
Also, Clark Gable sort of got it because he was being a bad boy at Metro, and Colbert didn't want to do it, but they paid her like what, $50,000. But she didn't show up at the Oscars. She was at the train station, and then when they announced, they stopped the train, and Shirley Temple. It was at the Biltmore, and Shirley Temple gave her the Oscar, and she went back and got the train.
So it's that's true. Nobody wanted to do the film, and even the people who were on the crew said, "Oh, let's get this thing over with. This is a crazy little film." And of course, it swept all the Oscars live, and you knew beforehand whether or not you had won. So my father knew he had won the Oscar, and he did not go to the ceremony. And of course, you're wondering why, and you're going to read the book and find out.
And really reading the book too, you really realize how much he was the guy. He was the artistic force who believed in the common man and the little man pulling up. It was he who viewed those films with that more than Capra. Capra directed it, but it was all his ideas.
So Frank Capra was a conservative. He was not particularly the philosophy and the kind of the sympathy for the common man that you see in the Riskin film, in the Capra Riskin films. It was really Robert Riskin, without question. He that was a. Look, it was the middle of the Depression. People were suffering. He was looking for ways to buoy up people's spirits, but also to appreciate what the average guy was going through. He loved people, and this was all baked into the Robert Riskin spirit. Capra knew a good story when he saw one, and so he was smart enough to appreciate my father's writing and his wit and his ear for dialogue. But then what happened was they became known as the Capra films. That was not true at the time. At the time, when I read in doing the book, I read old reviews. It was always the Riskin Capra have done another film, and and appreciation for the writing and the directing. Excuse me, but as time went on, I think the auteur theory became more dominant, but also I think Capra advanced his own image as these films being Capra-esque.
Just thinking on the Oscars, you had mentioned too.
Yeah, I was watching the Oscars this year, and somebody commented about how Capra said writing was so difficult. Well, he never wrote. And he never wrote because any attempts that he made, he really couldn't, he wasn't a writer.
Interesting.
And excuse me. So, but that it continues this notion that he was the creator of those films. But we're working on it.
Are there any questions from the crowd? Anybody? She doesn't